Hello again. In the Pure Worship book, we're on page 76. The heading now is Abundant Wealth Gave No Lasting Protection. Now, we don't have to read all of the paragraphs here, but we should read a few of them because they give some good history, but they make a, shall we say, wonky explanation of the good history. But we need to know the history, so let them tell the story here.
And we're talking about Tyre, right?
It's the city of Tyre. What does the city of Tyre signify for nowadays? Look what they do with it. I'll start off with a little bit of paragraph 20 on page 77. In fact, the inhabitants of Tyre ended up opposing God's people and even sold some of them into slavery. And then they give you some references from the Psalms from Joel and Amos.
Through Ezekiel, Jehovah said to those opposers, "Here I am against you, O Tyre, and I will bring up many nations against you, just as the sea brings up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and tear down her towers. I will scrape away soil and make her a shining bare rock." For protection, the inhabitants of Tyre trusted in their riches, which they felt provided them with the same security as the island city's 150-foot high walls. They would have done well to pay attention to Solomon's warning. And they quote Proverbs 18:11. "The wealth of the rich is his fortified city. It is like a protective wall in his imagination."
When the Babylonians and then the Greeks fulfilled Ezekiel's prophecy, the inhabitants of Tyre discovered that the security offered both by the city's wealth and by her literal walls was imaginary. After destroying Jerusalem, the Babylonians waged a campaign against Tyre for 13 years. Then, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great fulfilled a remarkable aspect of prophecies conveyed by Ezekiel. His army scraped together the ruins of the mainland city of Tyre and threw the stones, woodwork, and soil into the water, building a path to reach the island city. You can read about that in Ezekiel 26, verses 4 and 12. Alexander breached the walls, plundered the city, killed thousands of soldiers and citizens, and sold tens of thousands more into slavery. The inhabitants of Tyre were forced to know Jehovah when they learned the hard way that abundant wealth gives no lasting protection.
What lesson can we learn from the inhabitants of Tyre? Never would we want to allow the deceptive power of riches to cause us to trust in material things, viewing them as a protective wall. We cannot slave for God and for riches. Only those who serve Jehovah whole-souled are truly secure. Prophecies about the end of this present system will be fulfilled in every detail, just as surely as the prophecies against Tyre came true. At that time, those who trust in wealth will be forced to know Jehovah when he destroys this world's greedy, self-centered commercial system.
Well, again, it's a historical fiction imposed upon the text. There's no idea in any of the Old Testament that the Tyrians came to know Jehovah.
Yeah.
It is true that during the reigns of David and Solomon, there was an alliance between
Nations, yeah.
Israel. At that point, it was one nation.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an alliance between David and his son Solomon and King Hiram of Tyre. They even contributed, that is, the Tyrians contributed to the building of both the palace of the king and the temple. Mm-hmm. And that went on for a while. So why did not God judge them for their materialism and their riches then? But he does do it after the exile.
Well, I think first of all, Solomon had lots of wealth too.
Sure.
So I mean, they certainly weren't looking at them and thinking, "Oh, we shouldn't be so wealthy." They were admiring Solomon's wealth.
Yes.
So I think it's giving you the impression that somehow the Israelites were witnessing,
Mm-hmm.
like speaking to them, presenting a message to them. No, they observed the way Israel was. They saw all that wealth as a blessing from God.
The God of Israel, I guess.
Yeah,
Because
so
they were pagan.
yeah, so they weren't thinking that it was a bad thing.
No.
So it wasn't about that. It was about, because you mentioned they were friends with Israel during the reign of Solomon and David. Right? They were friends at that point.
And admirers.
And admirers. But later they become enemies of Israel. And then they treat them like enemies. So they're not neighborly anymore.
So the reason that Ezekiel, particularly in the period of the exile, is sent to and he spends a lot of time on this in those chapters of Ezekiel. That's why they're spending all this time here. Why does it happen then? And the answer is the same as it is in the case of Edom and Moab and Ammon, who've been around for 1,000 years already. Why is the judgment then? And it all has to do with the way all of these neighbors of Israel hate their neighbors.
Yeah.
They used to be friends, or they used to even be family in the case of Edom,
so
Moab, and Ammon.
They get judged on not being good neighbors, basically. And that doesn't take any kind of revelation. That only takes your conscience to know that you should love your neighbor.
Because the neighbor here, though, is God's people. That's why the timing of all of this is important. So even though Nebuchadnezzar never conquers Tyre, Alexander, 200 years later, does.
Yeah. So that whole little piece there about how this victory happened is amazing. It's an amazing story. And I don't remember learning about it, say, from the Watchtower, and you said you did learn about it in the aid book?
I think it was in the aid book.
But I wasn't an aid book reader, so I missed that.
But where did you learn this from? Christian books, right?
Yes, and I remember we were trying to help a couple in our association as witnesses. Mm-hmm. Who he had lost kind of faith in the Bible, and we used this kind of information as look at what the Bible prophesied and how it came true. These were amazing things. It gave me confidence in the Bible, so I think it saved me from just throwing out all faith. Well, I left the witnesses.
That goes back to what they say at the beginning of the section we read, right? That this is going to be this city is going to be scraped clean. Yeah. It's going to be a bare rock. How can that happen to such an influential city?
Yeah.
And then Alexander is the one who fulfills it.
So it's an amazing story. It's amazing that this would happen, and how even history shows this to be true. So it gave me confidence in the Bible. The prophetic word of the Bible. And the point is, it literally happened. It didn't happen in some way like we always interpret things as, well, symbolically this happened and it's represented in the scraping of, like you could do all kinds of stuff with that, but it literally happened.
That's right. So in a way, at the same time as all of this proves the Bible to be true and therefore trustable, it also undermines the entire prophetic interpretive policy of the Watchtower from at least the days of Rutherford. And really, Russell did a lot of hermeneutical Humpty Dumpty hermeneutics back in his day too. But Rutherford is the one who gave all of this over to symbolism.
Yeah. So
and now everything is interpreted symbolically by the Watchtower, except the things that are inconvenient.
Yeah. So when they say prophecies about the end of the present system will be fulfilled in every detail, just like Tyre. Well, Tyre's prophecies were literal. Half of what you say is happening is spiritual, symbolic.
Right. Starting with the idea that all of this has to do with a literal city, Tyre, and a literal city, Jerusalem. Now you say all of this was fulfilled in the case of literal Tyre, but it's only fulfilled in a spiritual Jerusalem, in a spiritual Israel.
Yeah.
And therefore you undermine even the credibility of the Bible. Anybody can make anything mean anything.
Yeah.
That's the essence of a interpretive system that is bound to fail ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And you know, this talk about the wealth. I think it's, you know, maybe they're looking at individual witnesses who don't have a lot of wealth because they sacrifice that to serve you. But that's not true of you. J.W. Org is a very wealthy economic power.
I would even call it an economic empire. It's
Yeah.
it's a worldwide web.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the days when Russell and Rutherford were campaigning.
So what kind of example are you to onlookers?
You don't sacrifice your wealth to bless your members even, let alone the rest of the world. Unlike other denominations who take a lot of their budget, a lot of their wealth, let's say Adventism and Mormonism, to actually take care of their people.
Yeah.
You don't do any of that.
Yeah.
It's all about passing your interpretations around the world.
In any of the churches we were associated with, there was always a budget, and part of the budget, a good chunk of the budget, went to outreach to people, helping people in other countries.
Many of whom were not Christians at all.
Yeah, digging wells, providing food, and local needs too.
Yeah.
And this was considered a means whereby you could show the love of Christ in what you were doing. And that was a witness.
Love of neighbor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's our link?
We were doing Ryle, Matthew, and in this one it was prophecies about Messiah fulfilled. But how? Symbolically or literally? That's the link.
See you soon.